everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to this podcast show of Mercy Unbound. It's a show that aims to provide hope and avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With we've got me today, I've got a great gentleman, Jason Jones. We're going to discuss his book, Dispatches from the Great Campaign, Defending Life on the Front Lines. It's available at crisismagazine.com, sophiainstitute.com, and Amazon. It's hard-hitting, it's challenging, and just really gets you thinking. We kind of live here in the States in a world of, we don't know what the rest of the world lives like. And Jason, it's a great honor to have you. You started the Vulnerable People Project, and talk about your own story in the book, how you became a tireless advocate of a culture of life and dignity. So we're going to have a great discussion today, people. Hang on to your seats. And Jason Jones, welcome to Mercy Unbound.
Brian, thanks for having me on your show.
First of all, right in the beginning of the book, you talk about how you got into pro-life and attitude, and share with the audience what your trigger was that got you so involved.
Yeah, I think my trigger in the pro-life movement is probably similar to so many people over the past 40, 50 years. And the pro-life movement is the largest, most passionate social movement in the history of the United States. And 1 out of 3 Americans have been involved in an abortion. For me, I was not raised with any faith. My family was not political. We didn't discuss politics. We discussed baseball and football, but we didn't discuss politics. My mother had me when she was 16. And so that's sort of my background. I always wanted to be a father. I always wanted to be a strong man to protect my children. My mom and dad, they were married. They got divorced, I think, before my mom was 17. So I've seen my parents in the same frame twice in my life, I think. Sort of my daydream was to be a father in a 2-parent home and to have a peaceful house. This was like my dream. And to me, sports was how I would do it. Is how I would provide for my family, football. But while I was in high school, my senior year, my high school girlfriend got pregnant. And the two of us, this wasn't like jarring or traumatic. It was kind of, we were like, hey, we get to be parents now and live happily ever after and get away from kind of the craziness of our childhood life. And so the day I turned 17, which was a few days after she told me she was pregnant, I joined the Army, went to the reception center, and about 8 weeks later, I was off to Fort Benning, Georgia. And while I was in basic training, her father took her to get a forced third trimester abortion against her will. And I didn't know really, I never thought about abortion once in my life. I don't think I really even understood that it was legal. I didn't, until I discovered that my child was destroyed from an abortion. And here I was, an irreligious kid. So as a young 17-year-old, in basic training, I was sort of jarred by abortion. And then as an infantryman, the experience of an infantryman, I just realized how privileged I was as an American and how violent the world is and how I wanted to order my life to help fathers protect their children from violence. I was always an atheist at this time. And so for me, but it wasn't like abortion and war and genocide. It was just children, fathers placed in impossible situations, and I want to protect children from violence. But I started going door to door, talking to people about abortion as a young soldier. And that's when Hawaii Right to Life heard about me, started volunteering for Hawaii Right to Life, engaging with the pro-life movement. And then after the military, I went to the University of Hawaii and started the Pro-Life Student Union and began to work towards this goal of, creating an organization that would defend life from the child in the womb to the child in Gaza. And I didn't like the consistent ethic that I was seeing in the Catholic Church because I felt they compared abortion to unlike incommensurate issues where there were a lot of prudential solutions to that we could disagree. So I didn't find that attractive. And I loved the pro-life movement, was very involved in it, but I felt that where I wanted to be was found an organization that treated abortion and like incommensurate issues, like genocide, democide, war. And that's how my organization was born. But in this process, I started reading, like I read Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life. And when I read the Gospel of Life, St. John Paul the Great used that expression, the great campaign. He said, we need a great campaign to defend life, the way we marshaled our resources to defeat fascism and communism. And so I kind of, in the 90s, gleaned onto that. And I looked at everything I did in the lens of a campaign, this great campaign to promote the incomparable dignity and beauty of the human person. And then in 2002, I founded my organization, the Human Rights Education and Relief Organization, which has two programs, Movie to Movement and the Vulnerable People Project. They're actually two programs of Hero. A lot of people know about my movies and they don't know about VPP. And a lot of people know about VPP and they don't know about my movies. So we've done a good job of keeping them as separate, because I don't want kind of the harshness and the sorrow of VPP to bleed into our movies, where we want you to eat popcorn and be happy and watch our films. So that's how I got my start.
You know, I've been to Nigeria and many countries in Africa and all over the world, and Nigeria is kind of a hotbed right now, and it's just waiting to explode, I think. Tell me what you guys. I saw you were helping Catholic churches there. Tell us just the situation in Nigeria and what's going on.
Yeah, it's quite heartbreaking. If you go to our website, vulnerablepeopleproject.com, you can see the work that we do. We don't publicize a lot of the work that we do in Nigeria because at the request of our partners on the ground, but we provide armed guards. We install solar panels and security cameras to protect Catholic schools, hospitals and parishes, seminaries. Just 3 weeks ago, one of our security guards was murdered, protecting seminarians, and 3 seminarians were kidnapped. 9 out of 10 Christians this year that will be killed in Nigeria. It's really heartbreaking. There's a war on Catholics around the world. In India, the rise of Hinduvata, Hindu nationalism, it's brutal and cruel. You know, Israel is showing absolutely no regard, whether they're stealing our churches in Jerusalem, murdering and beating Christians in the West Bank, funding Azerbaijan as they ethnically cleansed Artsakh. And of course, they've dropped 2,000-pound bombs on our churches, target our cross with a tank. And it's quite sorrowful that we as a community in the United States, Catholics, I don't think, and you've been there and you understand, we haven't marshaled our power and our voice to serve the persecuted church, to our shame. We watched as the first century Christian churches, the Catholics and the Orthodox, were wiped from the face of the earth by ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Catholic boys and girls are harvesting cobalt by hand for CCP-owned mines in Congo. We've had 12 Catholic bishops disappeared in China, just disappeared, not to mention the countless tens of thousands of Catholic lay people. So there's real war on the church. And one of my hopes at VPP is really to mobilize Catholics to raise their voice, order their public life in the service of the vulnerable, but especially those fellow members of the mystical body of Christ.
You mentioned in one of your articles in the book about a question: is the Vatican smothering its pro-life office with a seamless garment? And I know that there have been changes in the pro-life offices in the Vatican. Can you share what you meant by a seamless garment, and how perhaps, as you said, using all these other extraneous problems to tie them into pro-life and ended up diluting it so it's really ineffective?
Yeah, so this book is a collection of my essays over 30 years. Oh, no, 26 years. The first essay was something I wrote as a graduate student while getting my master's in military science and operational studies, where I called for disbanding NATO. And they tried to drive me out of the master's program. I was the only civilian in the program. And here I am calling for the disbanding of NATO because I predicted it would cause a war in Eastern Europe. Who knew? So this was an article I wrote addressing the changes that Pope Francis began to make early in his pontificate. And that's right. It's that when you compare abortion to an unlike incommensurate issue, unlike what minimum wage should be, that's a prudential issue with a lot of concerns. So, for example, If you raise minimum wage too high, then businesses just won't provide entry-level jobs. And, minimum wage jobs aren't meant to be a living wage or to provide a family. They're meant for members of families who can work, usually young or much older, and they can contribute to the family income. And for me, it was my minimum wage jobs as a young person that were my gateway into the workforce, where I learned a lot of valuable skills, met mentors. And so one could, but that doesn't mean there's not a point where we should argue for minimum wage to be raised. But these are prudential issues that there's a lot at stake. Same thing with trade agreements. One could say that, certain trade agreements are inconsistent with the Catholic understanding of life, and that might be true. Maybe we don't, obviously we don't want to import cobalt that was harvested by children or cars that were manufactured. Now Tesla's building a manufacturing plant in Chinese occupied East Turkestan where 3 million Muslims are in concentration camps. So there could be instances, but these are often prudential issues. But the intentional direct killing of civilians or innocent human life, whether it's a child in the womb, whether it's the elderly through euthanasia, whether it's through unjust, dropping bombs on hospitals, schools, and churches and synagogues and mosques, these are like incommensurate. And so what I felt what the Vatican was doing, whether it was by design or just by muddle-headedness, was the way I would always say too, is they're drowning the child in a sea of prudential issues.
Right.
And I confuse people a lot because a lot of folks see me as a seamless garment or consistent ethnic Catholic, which I hope that I am. But what I'm really addressing is the tactic. And what I think is it's a tactic to dilute the political power of the pro-life movement to achieve its goals, which is legal protection for the child in the womb. And I wouldn't want any of my activism to dilute the movement to protect the child in the womb from violence. In fact, I think when you compare abortion to like incommensurate issues, you're actually strengthening the political force of the pro-life movement. So when I compare abortion to genocide and democide and the bombing of churches in Gaza, I'm elevating the child in the womb's dignity to a lot of people who really wouldn't see the child in the womb as equal in dignity to the child in Gaza. And so this was my disagreement with the Vatican's pro-life office under Pope Francis. What I'm seeing with Pope Leo, we're both Sox fans from the south side of Chicago. His favorite pizza place was my favorite pizza place, which was my first legal job when I was 13, making minimum wage. But I see in Pope Leo, in many ways, he's very similar to Pope Francis, I think, in his sentiment. But I think in his thinking as an American, maybe he understands the Anglo-American political world more. And so he speaks with more force and directedness and clarity that's not as confusing to the Catholic Church in the United States. So I've been very grateful for Pope Leo's clear and precise presentation of the church's social teaching.
When Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was so much joy that we won the battle, but it's like, no. The battle's just beginning. And in one of your articles, you talked about Winston Churchill and Dunkirk and Darkest Hour. I saw both those movies and try and tie Winston Churchill in and where we're at in the pro-life situation, the ups and downs.
Yeah, it's not the overturning of Roe versus Wade wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end of the beginning. I see the overturning of Roe versus Wade as the first modest step to a culture of life. It's not a strategic victory. It was a tactical victory. And, we live in a constitutional republic, a liberal democracy. We are very powerful as citizens when we choose to be engaged. We want to influence the electorate. We want to influence the court. We want to influence how people vote and legislation that's introduced and passed. And obviously, we want to see full legal protection for the human person from the biological beginning to the end of life. There's all kinds of new threats. We have great threats like transhumanism and AI to human dignity. So it seems like we're winning battles that are almost irrelevant. Not that abortion is almost irrelevant, but surgical abortion is really now not the main threat to the life in the womb. It's chemical abortions. to young people, transhumanism and lifespan inequality and lifespan technology that requires the destruction of human life. These are going to be the great challenges in the future. So every generation of Catholics is going to have to deploy the church's teaching. And the foundation, what the church teaches us, is the truth about the human person and the vocation of the human person, which is simply to love God and love one's neighbor. But what that looks like before the invention of electricity or the invention of the atomic bomb or the invention of AI or transhumanist technologies, each generation of Catholics is going to have to deploy our teaching to the challenges. And that's why Pope Leo really excited me. When I heard he took the name Pope Leo, I knew instantly what he was signaling. He sees the threat of transhumanism and AI to the vulnerable and the poor and to the young. And we'll see an encyclical, probably his first encyclical, I'm guessing, will address these problems that will be an echo of Rerum Novarum. And so these are the great challenges we have. We can see the bigotry. There's a powerful poem from Auden called September 1939 about the rise of Hitler and fascism and Nazism in Europe. And in this poem, he traces it back to Martin Luther. We're seeing today with Ambassador Huckabee making really vile racist remarks about the Irish on his X account while tweeting at Ireland. We see the president of Babylon B, I think he is, Joel Berry, tweeting out that the Catholics dying in Gaza aren't really Christians because they're Catholic. They're the descendants of the families that were in the upper room. They're the first century Jews who accepted Jesus Christ as the Messiah's descendants. And he says they're not real Christians. We've really been weathering really vicious and cruel abuse to our Latino brothers and sisters, migrants who are lured into an underground economy and exploited. And again, that's another prudential issue. I want to secure the border. I want everyone working in this country to be working legally and have the same architecture of legal protection. But we shouldn't accept language that dehumanizes poor and exploited people. And many of them, if not most, are baptized Catholics, which means they are members of the mystical body of Christ. And so now we see the ambassador to Israel mocking the Irish, calling them drunks that need to sober up. We see probably one of the most popular conservative sites, Babylon B, saying that Palestinian Catholics are not really Christians. And we've been listening to Latinos, the most wicked kinds of abuse and jokes about people being eaten by alligators. This is really our opportunity as Catholics to communicate the truth of the gospel, because the heresy, the apostasy really of Christian Zionism has infected a large part of the Protestant community. And tragically, a lot of Catholics who consume Protestant media hold to heresies that they don't even understand are heresies.
You know, in one of your articles, you talked about the 6 principles of American global leadership and talked about how America has to be true to its word. You know, we can criticize all these countries, you know, every one of them's doing something we don't like, but has America been true to its word when you're honest? Such as Afghanistan, Iraq. We've made a lot of mistakes too, haven't we?
Yeah, well, my organization still has safe houses in Central Asia for our former Afghan allies that were promised visas in service to the United States. And again, if I were Secretary of Defense, I would have never promised our Afghan partners visas. Promising your Afghan partners visas is like promising your staff on a cruise ship first access to the lifeboat. It means you believe that you're going to fail. What I would have done is I would have promised them college education visas in the United States. We would have paid them handsomely. We would have had them investing their success and their survival in the future of Afghanistan. But that's not what we did. We made a promise, and we should keep that promise. And I think that promise played a large role in the failure of Afghanistan. But still, we simply should keep our promise. I'm a former infantryman, the Ranger Creed. Never shall I leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. We left 150,000 Afghan special immigrant visa recipients who traded their life and the lives of their wives and children in the service of this country, risked everything. And we broke our promise. We broke it to Iraq. We broke it to, we broke it, we break it again and again and again. And there's all this lamenting about the crumbling of a rules-based order. Well, we haven't played by the rules. Israel doesn't play by the rules. They've killed more journalists and aid workers have died in that little strip of land in this little war than in all wars in the world since World War I until today. My logistics partner at VPP, they've lost over 50 employees just trying to deliver food. 2 weeks ago, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, their snipers on helicopters shot holes in the water tank at Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza, emptying the water tanks of water. And the United States says nothing. So if we don't keep our word to our allies, if we don't show a true commitment to a rules-based order, then the rest of the world is going to want to see this, what they call the multipolar world, which is horrifying. I don't want India, which is literally a country that's structured on ethno-nationalist, racist oppression of the Dalits and others. China, the CCP that has 3 million Uyghur in concentration camps. I don't want parity with these countries. This will lead to war and violence and poverty for our descendants. But we're doomed to a breakdown of world order, peace. If not for these rules, by the way, who in the post-World War II era, a lot of these were great Catholic thinkers that helped structure a post-World War II order based on fairness, natural law. And as the hegemon, as the most powerful country in the history of the world, we really have no reason not to play by the rules. It's in our interests.
In one of your articles, you're talking about the just war concept and how they must distinguish military and civilians. But in Israel, let me preface my statement first by saying I'm a devout Catholic. I love the Jewish faith. I think the bridge is Jesus Christ, but we're brothers and sisters. And so it kind of broke my heart, I have to say, when I read your article about some of your experiences with Christians, as you started to allude to in the West Bank. You were going to help feed Catholics from one church, I believe, and before you could get the food in, what happened?
Oh, no. If you talk about the video you saw of me in Jordan, yeah, we had truckloads and truckloads of food. It's just not us. Israel has a policy of starving Gaza. We can't get our food into the church. We got food in this week, praise God. We got a hot meal to every Christian in Gaza yesterday and the day before. And this week we'll be providing thousands of meals to orphans. But this is nothing new. This goes back to the Nakba, the catastrophe. We have to acknowledge that the project in Israel, which many conservatives are coming to understand, is based on horrible theology that goes against everything the Catholic Church has ever taught about the rebuilding of the third temple. That's the denial of Christ. The denial of the temple was pointing towards Messiah. Rebuilding of the third temple is antichrist. It's the denial of Jesus Christ. The idea of a homeland for the Jews is fine. Of course, we want Jews and Yazidis and Muslim Palestinians and the Druze, and we want everyone to live in a political community where they're safe. And tragically, in this world, maybe we need states that are based on ethnic solidarity to guarantee their safety, whether they're Palestinians or Jews. But the idea that this is part of God's plan, if you're watching this and you're Catholic and you think that, if it is in any way part of God's will, it's his permissive will, and read the book of Revelations and see where it leads to. And it's not something we should never encourage, right? But in the United States, the Schofield Reference Bible and this dispensationalist movement through books like the Left Behind series has had such an influence on our Protestant friends. Well, we're all Protestants and evangelical adjacent. We all have friends like that. We all listen to these radio shows driving to and from work, and it seeps in. But what Catholics need to be mindful of, dispensationalist theology is rabidly anti-Catholic, rabidly so. And since the founding of the state of Israel, those who have suffered most are the Catholics and Orthodox Christians. When the state of Israel was founded, hundreds of churches, convents, and monasteries were destroyed by Israeli settlers. Priests and nuns murdered, whole communities wiped from the face of the earth, starting in 1949, actually just going back to the 20s. This is hard for a lot of Christians to understand because, as you know, when you go overseas, we're Americans, we want to see a white hat and a black hat. When I first went to Sudan, I went to Darfur during the genocide. A friend of mine said, Brad Phillips from the Persecution Project Foundation, Brad said, Jason, you're an American. When you get here, you're going to look for the black hats and the white hats. You're not going to find anything but gray. And when you go in the mirror, look in the mirror, look at the color your hat is. It's going to be gray too. So these issues become really complex. So then what is it that we're supposed to do as Catholics? With the Vulnerable People Project, in different places in the world, we have armed guards in front of synagogues and mosques. Most of our, obviously, security programs are protecting Catholics and other Christians, but after October 7th, we put security guards in front of some vulnerable Jewish communities in Africa. In Central Asian countries, there are Muslim minority communities that provide education to girls. We provide armed guards, actually, for Muslim girls' schools in certain countries. We do not, as an organization, openly proselytize, but everyone knows we're Catholic and also very Marian. And everyone knows, everyone we save. Just today, there was a Muslim who reached out to me that his cousin was starving to death and pregnant in Gaza and asked if I could get his cousin some food. So what we did was today, like 12 hours ago, we delivered food to her entire neighborhood, just a whole neighborhood. She's due any day now. We gave her like 6 months supply of baby formula. Now, never will I talk to them about my Catholic faith, but I can promise you they know that a Catholic did this for them. And we want people to understand, we want to evangelize through our heroic action. And sometimes the most heroic things we do is tell people uncomfortable truths. Like the uncomfortable truth Catholics need to hear right now is, if you don't raise your voice, the government of Israel will erase the oldest Catholic community in the world right under our noses. And the United States is culpable, and the American Catholic is culpable, because every election cycle comes down to, who will Catholics vote for? They voted for W, he won. They voted for Obama, he won. They voted for Trump the first time, or for Biden, Biden won. They voted for Trump the first time. Trump the first time, Trump won. Second time we voted for Biden, believe it or not, Biden won. Now Trump won. If we raise it, we are much more powerful than the Israeli lobby, and we are much more powerful than a collection of churches and strip malls that promote an ethno-nationalist genocidal theology called Christian Zionism. The problem is we've been cowardly. We have not raised our voice for our co-religionists who are being starved and bombed and beaten out of existence.
People wanted to help the church in the area. Would they go to the vulnerablepeopleproject.com? Is that?
Yeah, if you go to our website, you'll see all of our food deliveries. We the week after Pope Leo was elevated, we put the Socks logo on half the packages. You can see that, and we put Pope Leo waving on the other.
That's awesome.
This week, I'll break it here. I don't know when this is going live, but I'm going to be at Ron Paul's birthday this week, and so we delivered thousands and thousands of meals, and the packaging says "Happy Birthday, Ron Paul," and we've made a beautiful montage of Palestinian children that are starving, holding up their food trays with "Happy Birthday, Ron Paul." Mm-hmm. We want to thank him for his courageous voice in behalf of the victims of genocide in Gaza. But yeah, if you go to vulnerablepeopleproject.com, you can see our work in Africa, India, Central Asia, the Middle East, wherever the church is being violently persecuted, or any other ethnic or religious community is being violently persecuted and no one's there to defend them, we at VPP go in. And my book, Dispatches from the Great Campaign, it's really a collection of my thoughts in my battles, whether it was fighting for the child in the womb at the Republican National Convention or in political campaigns, or whether it was fighting to defend Christians in Iraq or on the front lines of the war in Ukraine, where we had operations evacuating women and children, delivering insulin and removing landmines. It's all there in the dispatches from the Great Campaign. And people go, you do so much. It's all over the place. No, we do. I do one thing. Our apostolate does one thing. We protect the vulnerable from violence. We do it in only two ways. We tell the truth about the human person, how inviolable, their inviolable dignity. And then we inspire solidarity with the vulnerable. That's all we do. We do one thing two ways. Through Movie to Movement, we make movies. Through the Vulnerable People Project, we do works of mercy. And people see, oh, this conservative, Republican, Catholic Jason Jones loves Palestinians?
Yeah.
That's strange. What's that all about? So through our works of mercy, it makes people think. And then we run really, really aggressive influence campaigns to make sure their voices are heard by policymakers.
One article caught me off guard by the title. It said, President Trump, if you want peace in Syria, look to Switzerland. To talk about that for a couple minutes.
Okay, so this is where, our Catholic faith and history and my conservative impulse, you look at the problem of Syria, you have the Alawites, you have Kurds, you have Druze, you have Yazidis, you have, Sunni, you have this really diverse community. Switzerland went through an extremely violent period in the 19th century because you have different ethnicities and different languages. And they tried to impose a Napoleon-style, like top-down power structure over Switzerland. Well, when you have all of these different cantons, right, with different languages and different cultures, this is going to create a lot of violence because their interests are always going to be at odds and there's always going to be animosity. So the Swiss did something brilliant. They kept their national structure, but they devolved power down to the cantons. So much so that no one cares in Switzerland who their president is. Absolutely powerless. The power is in the canton. Well, when you look at the entire Middle East, Syria included, the borders are absolutely ridiculous. Beyond that, and I'll say this to anti-Semites that cheer for the destruction of the state of Israel. Half of the Jews in Israel are from the Middle East. Half, okay? Maybe more than half. To see the wiping away of the state of Israel, something I wouldn't have created at the time. I would have opposed its creation, but I would have opposed the creation of half of these countries in the Middle East because they don't make sense. But if we were to wipe away those borders, it's in a radical inorganic change again, and it won't make sense. So the borders are the borders. So what do we do? What do we do if we want peace and we want prosperity? Well, my suggestion is we devolve power down. We keep all of the borders in Iraq and in Syria. We fight for a two-state solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We devolve power down so people feel they're represented, they feel their security is guaranteed, and they can have prosperity and they can have peace. So look to Switzerland. Don't rewrite the borders. The borders were written. We know this because the Soviet Union spied on the French and the British and released in 1922 to the Arab world the notes. The borders of the Middle East were designed to maximize ethnic and religious tension and interethnic and interreligious tension. So divide people by ethnicity, divide them within ethnicity, divide people by religion, divide them within their religion. That was what it was designed to do. Okay. So, but if we were to go rewrite the borders again, it's going to be catastrophic. So sorry to be so winded. Something that I'm passionate about. Let's just keep the borders. Let's acknowledge, the borders of Israel, arbitrary and weird. Yes, unless you believe this bizarre, newly invented Zionism that came from atheists in Europe and is promulgated by Protestants at strip malls. But so what? So are all the borders. Syria's borders, Iraq's borders are goofy. Just devolve power down. I want the Kurds to be secure, the Syrians and Chaldeans to be secure. I want the Syrians. I want the Alawites to be safe. We want everyone to be safe. This week, right now, in Syria, there's the equivalent of an October 7th every week or two. And these are our co-religionists. And again, why don't we hear about this? When our co-religionists experience their October 7th again and again and again, all over the world, Nigeria, India, Syria, Iraq, Gaza, West Bank, it's not taken serious. That's because our voices, we're not even looking, let alone speaking. But that's why we look to Switzerland. Canton models for the Middle East, keep the national borders, devolve power down, guarantee security of the ethnic and religious communities, peace and prosperity for the entire community. For that to happen, the United States and Russia and Western powers have to be truly committed to not the exploitation of the Middle East, but to making them equal partners and making them stewards of their own destiny. And so if the Middle East is destabilized, I don't think it's an accident.
People, we've been discussing with Jason Jones his book, Dispatches from the Great Campaign, available at crisismagazine.com and sophiainstitute.com. I want to read from someone who wrote a comment about the book. He said, Bear Wozniak said, Jason Jones gives us his perspective on the world in crisis like a wordsmith pounding out a sharp edge with a forge and hammer. This book should come with a warning. His riveting words will challenge you to action. If you didn't hear a call to action today, people, you might want to turn up your hearing aid. Jason, before we wrap up today's show, how would you like to make about any comments that's on your heart right now?
You know, someone I admire recently wrote an article, said that we're winning. I admire this person, but I thought, we're losing. We should be losing. You know, when you kneel down next to a woman caught in the act of adultery, when you kiss a leper, you're standing with what the world sees as losers. And if we ever feel like we're winning, I don't think we're winning. And right now, those of us who are members of the mystical body of Christ, that are blessed with the privileges that we've all been blessed with, peace and prosperity, we have to know that around the world, our fellow Catholics go to Mass in fear. In Gaza, they're starving. In the West Bank, they're beaten. They're hunted in Nigeria and India. They're surveilled and brutalized in China. And we're one body. Paul says we should weep with those who weep. Are we weeping with the persecuted church? You know, Paul really commanded us to pray and fast for the persecuted church. I was like, who is he talking about? Like, they were all persecuted. Like, who was like, I'm not persecuted. And sometimes I do think we think we're winning because we're having battles. We're winning battles in our own little political communities that are superfluous. Not that we shouldn't fight them. They're just really weird, silly first world battles. But meanwhile, our co-religionists are fighting an existential crisis. So I would ask everyone here right now to raise your voice for the Christians in Gaza. There will be no more Christians in Gaza. There will be no more Christians in the West Bank or Jerusalem. I mean, in a year. There'll never be a Mass in Bethlehem again, or there'll be a small community that just basically cares for a church, but the Christian community that lives there will be gone. We need to raise our voice. And if we don't do it, no one will. I'm so grateful to be a conservative Catholic because the power to change our policy that dramatically impacts the church around the world it's those of us who are Catholics, especially those of us who identify as on the right. And so we need to be vocal and speaking up for the oldest Christian community in the world, the Christians in Gaza, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, in Syria, in Iraq. We have to be their voice to power.
I was thinking of Martin Luther King said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can. And Jesus is the light of the world, and we got to continue to work hard. I admire you, Jason, for all you're doing, and keep up the good work. And God willing, I hope to have you back soon on Mercy Unbound. People, I hope you enjoy the show. Please share, pass it along, and make sure you go to Vulnerable People Project. And you ought to get this book. You can't put it down. Dispatches from the Great Campaign, Defending Life on the Front Lines by Jason Jones.
And Brian, can I say one more thing? If you go to the website, vulnerablepeopleproject.com, and donate $20 or more, you get a free copy of the book.
That's awesome.
I don't want to donate and then give 20 and then buy a book, and you're going to get 2 books in the mail.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for joining me, people. Share this one. And Jason, we hope to see you back soon. So God bless.
God bless you.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/drbrian, BRYAN Thatcher, THATCHER, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.